In this presentation, we're both going to cover how you can start managing 1099 and 1096 reports in SAP Business One. So what the initial settings need to be on your business partner master data for your vendors. We're also going to see how to allocate 1099 forms and boxes to AP invoices that we want the report to take into account, how to generate the reports and how to check for accuracy for those reports, the functionality of 1099 editing, as well as the 1099 opening balances and what scenarios we might need to use these 1099 opening balances in. And finally, we're going to cover how to run print tests for these 1099 forms before January, so that we make sure that we are ready to print those out from SAP. And last but not least, we're going to cover the very specific scenario regarding the new non-employee compensation form that the IRS introduced last year in 2020. We do have a new 2021 1099 non-employee compensation form. We're going to go over the strategy that each one of you is going to need to go through in order to print that form if your version of SAP is an older version and does not include that layout. So thank you for being here, and let's get started. So it all starts with setting up correctly your vendors in your business partner master data. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'm using a demo database, and I already set up a couple of my vendors for 1099. In your case, if you want to just find out if you already set up all your vendors for 1099, or if your predecessor did that, the quickest way to do that would be to go to Business Partners, Business Partner Master Data. And once this window opens, you would select your vendors. That's 1099 only applies to vendors. And then you just place an asterisk in any other field. And when you click on enter, this is going to show a report with all your vendors. The next thing you can do is go to your form settings for this report. And we're actually going to add the fields 1099 box and 1099 form code. Once we update this, we would need to close this report and then click on enter again, run it again. And now we see that we have information relating to 1099 in these two vendors, Acme Associates and Far East Imports. All the other vendors in my list are not set up for 1099. So this is a very good way of quickly checking which of your vendors are already set up for 1099 and which you might be missing. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to open this vendor, LaserCom, and I'm going to show you how to set it up for 1099. You can do this after you created the vendor, but if you're creating a new vendor, you can do it at the same time. The information that you're going to need for your vendor is the same that you will input for any other vendor. So importantly, you need to remember to include the federal tax ID, because this is something that will be pulled out in the 1099 report. But then you're going to need the address, the contact persons, etc. So the same information that you use regularly. The only change is that in the accounting tab, you're going to see these two boxes here, 1099 form and 1099 box. And from these fields, you need to choose. In this case, we're going to choose 1099 miscellaneous, which is very commonly used. And then after you choose the form, you're going to need to choose which box you're going to be using for this particular vendor. Very commonly used box is other income. And the other one that it's also very commonly used is the non-employee compensation. as you know, as per the recent changes in the IRS, for non-employee compensation, you would need to use the new form 1099 NEC. But if you are on a previous version than the one that included the hotfix for this, you might still see this non-employee compensation under the options. For this purpose, we're going to just use other income. And we now click on update. And if we run the report again, we choose to see our vendors. We now see that we have 3 of our vendors are already set up for 1099. So what happens when you already have vendors correctly set up for 1099 is that whenever you create an AP invoice for one of those vendors, and we're going to choose the first one here, Acme Associates, that we already know it's correctly configured for 1099, we're going to have to treat this invoice exactly the same as any other invoice. We need to input the dates. We're going to do a service invoice because it's most typically what a NEC 1099 vendor is going to be, we're going to be creating for. And let's just say that this is for cleaning services, April. We're going to have to choose the account that we want this to hit, and we're going to just choose miscellaneous expenses. For instance, for this, you will need to follow exactly the same process as to any other invoice that you do in your company. The difference comes in the accounting tab, where you're going to find that it's already populated with the selections you made for the vendor regarding 1099 management. So you're going to see that in the form 1099, the option is the one that we selected for the vendor, which is the one by default for this vendor in any purchase documents that we create for this vendor after setting it up correctly in the business partner master data. So we can edit this right now. Some vendors might ask us to treat specific invoices slightly different. Maybe they need a different 1099 form for specific services that they're providing. So if we are asked to do that, or we need to do that for a vendor, we can do that. We can change this here for each particular document. If we don't touch it, everything will go to that predefined form or box. Interestingly enough, you are already familiar with the fact that once you add an invoice in SAP Business One, the system always warns you that you will not be able to make changes to this document after you have added it, right? And it asks you this every single time because it is true. You can, there are most of the things you can't edit after you've added a document to SAP Business One. In the case of 1099 reporting, what is going to happen is that there's an exception to that rule. And if you go to this, which is the AP invoice that we've already created, you will see that you are still able, after adding the document, to edit these 2 fields. This is only possible before a payment has been done for this particular document. Once we add a payment to this document, both these fields will be grayed out and we will no longer be able to edit them. But if we've created a purchase document and we later realize that, oh, we needed to change this form, we want this information from this particular document to go to a different form, we can still do it if we have not added the payment yet. What we're going to do next is we're going to add the payment for this invoice. And again, we do this in the same way that we do whatever process is the one that we follow in our company. And we're going to add this payment. And now when we refresh here, we now see that both these fields are already grayed out and we're no longer able to edit them. Basically, remember that the 1099 report is going to include all AP invoices that have been paid within the year period to the vendors that had the setting correctly configured into all the documents that have these 1099 fields correctly filled in. You can also leave some documents out. That is also another scenario that could happen. So if you remember, before adding the document or even before adding the payment, you can edit this information in the fields, which one of the options is also you can leave them empty. And what that will do is that that particular document will not be taken into account in the 1099 report. So next we're going to see, where do you find the 1099 report after you've been generating AP invoices for your vendors, which were already set up as 1099 vendors. There are many ways that lead to Rome, as they say, and you just need to find reports under the financials module, whichever way works best for you. One way is going to the financials module here in the menu, and then scrolling down to the very end of the financial module to open the financial reports, then accounting. And under that folder, you're going to find the 1099, 1096 report. Another very quick way is just typing in here 1099, and that's going to open everything for you. So you're going to be able to go to the 1099, 1096 report from here. Or if you prefer to use the menu on top, you just click on modules, financials, financial reports, accounting, 1099, 1096 report. So once you click there, you're going to be greeted by a window like this one. And right now what we're going to get is the 1099 form. And here we get to choose which one we want to run. We're going to have to, you could run it for every form, but because of the change, and especially if you are running on an older version of SAP Business One, you will probably need to do this twice. We're just going to run it now for 1099 non-employee compensation. And the dates that we're going to choose are the posting dates from January 1st to December 31st of this year. Once we click OK, in this case, this is the only vendor that was set up for 1099 in our system in this demo database, for which we have made AP invoices after setting it up correctly, and for which we have paid invoices within this period. Let's see how we can double check if everything was included in the report as it should. What we can do is we see here that the total amount of payments that is going to be recorded on the report is 3,500. So if we click on the golden arrow here, that's going to take us to the business partner, and we can go and check the account balance. And if we click on this little icon to show graph here, this is a very quick way of checking and a very graphical way of seeing things. This is going to bring by default all the purchases that we've made from this vendor throughout history. So if you see here, we got posting and due dates from starting from 2006, because this is a demo company. So we want to filter, and we only want to see the results for those documents that were posted with the date of 2021. There is no way of actually typing in here January 1st and here December 31st. That's not how this filter works. What you will do is that you will open here, and it's going to show you all the available dates for documents posted for this vendor. And what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to scroll and choose the first one that you see for 2021 and the last one that you see for 2021. That's why you don't see here January 1st and December 31st. It's because you need to choose from already available documents on the report. So once you choose those dates, the range that you want to see, you click on filter. And then if you click OK, that's going to be the filter that is going to be applied next time you just click on filter, okay? So now we see that we had 3 different documents, purchase documents for this vendor in 2021. And the total amount that we purchased from this vendor is 4,500, not 3,500. Why did the 1099 report show 3,500? This is a very common thing that we talk about our customers almost every year. And what you need to take into account is that the 1099 report is only going to take into account whatever was paid, whatever amounts were paid to that vendor on that period of time. So you might have open invoices. They won't be showing up in the 1099 report until you pay those invoices. And only if you pay those invoices in the year that you want to report. So if you're going through this process in January of 2022 and you're trying to report 2021 and you find that one of your vendors, there's an invoice there that is open, so it still has not been paid, and you want to fix that because you need to include that on the report for that vendor, and you post a payment with a 2022 date, please remember that that won't make it available for the report of 2021. The report takes into account the payment date. So in this case, this is the invoice that was open. We're gonna actually pay it right now so that you see what happens. And once we've added the payment with a 2021 date, we're going to close this. And now we're going to refresh. We need to close. You know that sometimes some SAP windows allow you to refresh and others just, you need to close and reopen again. So we go again to see our report. We click on filter. And since we clicked OK last time, we have the same filter again. So we just need to click on filter now, click OK again, because that's what we want to keep for next time. And now we see that both amounts match, because not only these invoices were posted on this year, but they were paid on 2021. So now let's go back to the 1099 report. Let's run it again. So we're going to do it this way. We're going to go through reports, which is also a different way of going to the 1099 report, financials, then accounting, and 1099, 1096. Everything is, we're going to keep the same, and the dates are already there for us. And now when we run the report, we see that for Acme Associates, the amount is 4,500. So please keep that in mind. If you want to add payments to invoices that are open, please add those payments. If you want it in the report of 2021, you need to make that payment on 2021. In order to show you the 1099 editing functionality, I have created some transactions, a number of transactions of purchasing transactions for a different vendor in our demo database. In this case, we're going to use the vendor Far East Imports. So let's take a look of what the situation is for this vendor. This vendor was set up as a 1099 miscellaneous vendor for the box other income. So right now, what we want to check is what were the transactions in the year that we want to report in 2021. So as I mentioned before, we just go to the list and we find the very first 2021 date, which in this case is January 15, and the very last, which in this case was October 16. So now we filter and we click OK, and that gives us very clear visibility of all the transactions that happened with this vendor on 2021. And we have a couple of different situations here. We see some AP invoices that are still open, so they haven't been paid yet. And we have 2 of those. And we also have a credit memo that has not been applied yet. And we have a couple of invoices that have been paid already. So right now, if we run the report as is, the 1099 report for this vendor is going to be 8,250 for 2021. And if we go back to the vendor, we can see in the accounting tab that by default, all this is going to be showing in the 1099 miscellaneous form and in the box 3 other income. Let's see what we can do with the 1099 editing functionality. You find the 1099 editing functionality under financials, and then just looking for 1099 editing. This is going to bring up this wizard, and we have 2 options at the very beginning. This actually, it's going to differentiate between, do we want to change forms or boxes within a form, and that we can only do for open invoices and credit memos. So let's imagine in this case that this vendor tells us, yes, everything that, all the work that I've done for you can be placed in a 1099 miscellaneous report for other income, but I did do one consultancy work for you, and I would need that in a 1099 non-employee compensation form instead. So if we get this type of request, or we need to do this, and the invoice is not yet paid, or the invoices have not been paid yet, we know that we can edit that directly on the invoice, but we can also do it through this report. So we would click on open invoices and credit memos, and we would choose, in this case, we're only choosing this one vendor, and we want to see everything. So we are not making a selection here, we're not filtering here. So once we click OK, we see the list of transactions that, as I mentioned before, have not been paid yet. And here we have the option of quickly editing this. So let's say that the vendor tells us that invoice 1182 is the one that they want on a different report, on a non-employee report. We can actually make this change here. And maybe we say that also this credit memo needs to be taken into account for the non-employee compensation. So we can make this change here. And once we update this information, if we go to that invoice, it will have the new selection. And then now after we pay it, then we won't be able to change this back again. Okay, but if you need to actually change a number of invoices that still have not been paid, this is a good way of doing it. So we're going to just click OK, and then I'm going to show you the other functionality in the 1099 editing, which is if you choose the second option, which reads invoices and credit memos not marked as submitted, what we are going to be seeing here are documents that have already been paid. So we are no longer able to edit the form that they need to hit, or the box within the form. But what we can actually edit is the amount that we want the 1099 report to show for that invoice. So this scenario is a little different. The invoice needs to be already paid, but the vendor might tell us from invoice 1183, please only apply to the 1099 2,000 instead of 4,750. We are able to make this change here. And once we update, that is going to affect the 1099 report. If we go back to the invoice that was affected by this change, we will see that the invoice itself does not change. It's still showing, of course, a total payment due and the total amount of 4,750. What has been impacted is the report, the 1099 report. For the purpose of showing the 1099 opening balances and a scenario in which you might need to use that, I have created another vendor, another 1099 vendor called Ocean Computers on our demo database. This vendor has been set up for 1099 as is shown here on these fields. 1099 miscellaneous, and I've already chosen the box that I want to apply. So if we go through the same process that as we went before, and we choose to show the graph, and we're now going to filter using the filter in the toolbar, and we want to see the postings within year 2021, and we now know that we need to sort throughout the dates and find the first date in 2021 and the last date in 2021, for which there is a document for this vendor. So now we filter, we click OK, and we see that in this case, we have a very consistent report. These are all the purchasing transactions posted on the system for this period of time, and all of them have been paid. So looking at this, we would assume that the 1099 report would show an amount of 12,500. Let's see what happens when we go and run the report. So we go to modules, as we learned before, financials, financial reports, accounting, 1099, 1096, and we're gonna run the report for 1099 form. We choose the form miscellaneous, which is the one that is assigned to this vendor, and we're gonna choose this vendor, Ocean Computers, which is the one that I used for this scenario. And we're just the dates are already there, in the system already populates the current year date on those fields. You might need to change it if you're doing this on January next year. But once we click OK, we find that the 1099 report for this vendor is only showing $9,000 and not $12,500. What could be the problem here? In this case, what happened is that we did set up the vendor correctly, but we only set it up at a very specific point in time, and we had already created invoices for this vendor which had not been correctly posted because the fields were not selected on those invoices, and therefore the report is not taking those invoices into account. Let's take a closer look at how this might have happened. We see that we have some invoices that are very early in the year, and maybe we remember that we learned about the 1099 setting of the vendors later in the year. So let's take a closer look at this invoice, for instance, and let's make sure if this invoice was taken into account in the 1099 report or not. We can go to accounting, and now we see that these fields are empty. We can't edit this anymore. So the only way that we can make sure that the invoices that affect this vendor and don't have those boxes checked are taken into account in the report is by using the opening balances. So I see that the first 3 invoices of the year were not taken into account for the report because the vendor had not been correctly set up by then. If I go to the 4th invoice of the year and I go to accounting, I see that already this vendor had been set up by April, and therefore going on after April, all of the other transactions were taken into account, and that's why we're seeing a different account balance. In order to input some information in the 1099 opening balances, we need to go to Modules, Administration, System Initialization, Opening Balances, 1099 opening balance. Once we're greeted with the wizard, then we select the vendor. In this case, we're just doing this with this one vendor, Ocean Computers. So we're only going to choose that one vendor. And we're going to click OK. What this does is it allows us to input manually here an amount for the opening balance. So the total amount, if we see right here, we had 3 transactions that had not been taken into account. So we need to make a mental note of the total amount of those 3 transactions, which is 3,500. And once we input this opening balance here and we update, sorry, we'll input this with the date of April. So once we've done this and we've included the opening balance, if we now go and run the report again, for this vendor, we already have all the information here. So I'm just going to click OK. We now see that the amount matches. You can use the opening balance functionality also to add any additional transactions that happened outside of your system. If you still want to run the report in SAP Business One, you can add an opening balance to the 1099 report of that specific vendor. When you go into the opening balances window or wizard, you might already find an amount there if you just went live mid-year and you already went through that process. If you need to modify that amount, that's the place to do it. $1099 and 1096 forms, you need to download them or purchase them from different vendors, and they come pre-printed. So one of the delicate aspects of reporting 1099 through SAP is that we need to make sure that the printer is correctly aligned so that the information is actually filling in the right box within the form. We highly recommend that you get these forms early on, and then you make copies. You make photocopies of it so that you can make printing tests with your printer, and we can make sure that come January next year, you are ready and everything is printing out correctly. Next, we're going to cover how to go about that process of testing your reports with the pre-printed IRS forms. Once we've validated that the amount that we have for each 1099 vendor on the report is the correct one, the next step is to test the printing of the report itself. And for that, we recommend that you photocopy the different forms from the IRS and that you use those on your printer to make sure the alignment is the correct one. You're going to need to make a print test for each type of form. So if you're going to be printing 1099 miscellaneous, 1099 non-employee compensation forms, and of course you also will be printing 1096, then you need to do those 3 tests in advance. And in order to show you how to do that, I'm going to just do it for 1099 miscellaneous, which is the one I have selected here. And we only choose one vendor because we don't need to print many examples. We just need one form to see that the information is correctly populating where it should be on your paper. So we're going to choose this vendor. The dates are already populated here. Interestingly, in this window, please take into account that by default, you will be selecting to show the non-submitted transactions. This means that this report is not going to be showing anything that has already been printed in a 1099 report. And this is important, and you're going to know why in just a little while. Also, here are two options that I haven't mentioned before and that you can look into. We haven't covered this scenario on this webinar, but this is also a possibility to include payments to those vendors which are not based on invoices. And also, you might want to see vendors with 1099 amounts lower than required. I'll show you in a little while where to set the lower that is required. So let's go and do the test print. Remember that the dates are already populated here by the system. We click OK, the amount looks okay. And then we need to go to preview. Here is the very first option on our toolbar on the top. And when we click preview, what opens is exactly that, a preview of the information that the system is going to be printing on your form, on your paper form. Now is the time to load your printer with the photocopy of the IRS official 2021 form and click on print to see how it prints. This window, this system message is actually very, very important. Since you're only doing a print test, please select no. Otherwise, this particular vendor will be showing as already submitted, and it won't show on the report, on the complete report come January when you want to really print all the reports. So you now select no, and you go to your printer, you take a look at that, at the form. If everything is correct, you know that you're good to go, and that come January, you'll be able to load your computer with the real forms and just print away. If you do have concerns, please contact support@consensus.intl. We will do our best to help you align the layout to your printer settings. And if you are on a version of SAP Business One that does not yet include the non-employee compensation specific form, also please, as soon as possible, contact support. As we know, back in 2020, the IRS introduced the form 1099 non-employee compensation. It's a new form that you need to use. Before, we were using the miscellaneous 1099 form, and we were just checking a box for non-employee compensation. But the IRS introduced a whole new form for this. The system didn't have that layout, and what SAP did was they included a hotfix on a very specific version and feature pack. The feature pack and version in which this hotfix was included is the one that that is showing on the screen. I'm going to very quickly explain what this means. 10.0 refers to the release family, so SAP Business One or SAP Business One version for SAP HANA version 10. The FP stands for feature package, which is the way that SAP Business One now delivers innovation on a quarterly basis, not only to attend to legal changes like this one, but also to include additional functionality or maybe even architectural changes, etc. The 4-digit number that you see actually stands for 20 as in the year, 2020, and 11 it's for November. So this feature package was released on November 2020, and HF01 refers to hotfix 01. How do you find out what version of SAP you're actually running and what are the next steps is what we're going to see next. To find out what version of SAP Business One your company is running, you can do this by clicking on Help on your top menu and then choosing the very last option called About SAP Business One. And this text line is actually giving you all the information you need about the version you are running. So in the case of this demonstration, I was running an SAP Business One 10 version for SAP HANA, feature package 2108. So that means that I'm running the very latest feature package that is available. So the one released in 2021 in the month of August. This is a very quick way of knowing. what version you have, and if your version includes the new non-employee compensation layout. You can also double check that by going to Modules, Administration, Setup, Financials, 1099 table. And there you will see all the different options that you have available. Since the layout was already included in my version, I can see it right here. If you do not see that on this table, you will probably be on a previous version, and you need to contact support@consensusintl.com so that we would be able to upload the 1099 non-employee compensation for 2021 with ample time for you to test your printing. Please do this validation as soon as possible. And if you do need us to help you with that layout, the sooner you contact us and the sooner you do those testing, the more we can make sure that you will be ready come January 2022, sorry. I know it looks a little far and maybe you are now overloaded with other stuff, but January is also a very, very tricky month with lots of things going on. And if we leave this for the very last minute, we might not be able to help you. And you might need to file in manually, which depending on the number of reports that you need to file could be very, very troublesome. Also, a note to those customers that we helped with the 2020 non-employee compensation layout. If you have not yet upgraded to a later version of SAP, please retest that layout. The IRS did release a new form for 2021, so we might need to make adjustments again. We are asking all of you to make these printing tests, which you can do without even validating the amounts yet because the year is not over. We are asking you to do those validations as soon as possible before the end of November so that we can work on that before the end of November, and we can then forget about that and make sure that you are ready to report your 1099s, to get your 1099 reports from SAP. So a final summary of the steps we are asking you to make after seeing this session is: first, verify if the 1099 non-employee compensation form layout is available for you on the SAP Business One version that you are running, or verify which version you are running so that we know if the layout is available. If not, if that layout is not available to you and you are going to need it, please contact support@consensusintl.com as soon as possible. Once we have uploaded the new layout, and in the case that you're running a later version and that layout was already there, please run print tests for all the forms you'll need. So all the 1099 forms you're going to be using, as well as the 1096 form. From all the companies that you will be using to run those 1099s, you might be managing more than one database, and you might need to run these reports from several databases. It's very important that you verify from each one of those databases, as we will need to make changes in all databases if adjustments are needed. Please take into account that this cannot be considered an emergency in the last days of January. So we really need to work for this in advance. We really appreciate your support. And a final note regarding SAP Business One maintenance and release strategy. For those of you who are still running 9.3, a recommendation to seriously consider upgrading to the latest version of SAP. Please talk to your account manager at Consensus, talk to your SAP Business One administrator. 9.3 is its mainstream maintenance period has already ended. And that means that there won't be any new functionality or corrections added to that version. So basically the mainstream maintenance strategy for SAP is a period of 5 years after the original release of the first family of the family. In this case, 9.0 is the family. So please take this into account, contact us. We are happy to plan an upgrade with you and analyze the risks and the implications of an upgrade, which also brings a lot of positive new functionality and hot fixes like this one. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you will be running 1099 reports seamlessly.